So 3 small points. Point number 1, when I was a little boy in Brooklyn, the notion that Sam Sifton would have a guest, Bob Kerrey, just never entered my mind.
I feel the same way, Sam.
Yeah, I know. Point 2, we're changing the hashtag on the fly to leguminous crops. That's hashtag leguminous crops. There was a third point, but I don't have enough electricity. Bob, I presume you watched the debate last night?
I did.
Food policy didn't come up. Food policy rarely comes up in political debate. Every person in this room could tie food policy to things that did come up in the debate, the economy, for instance, jobs, healthcare, and the like. But it just never comes up. Why is that?
Well, I mean, you have a pretty long list of things that didn't come up in last night's debate that are relevant to people.
Sure, but you know, at a food conference,
Look, I think there's I'd say there's 2 things. First of all, a little bit of background. I left the Senate in 2001 because a woman from Brooklyn I was dating wouldn't agree to marry me unless I agreed to try to have a baby. We have a 15-year-old, so I think I hit the last egg she had. And last night we were doing homework with my 15-year-old, and he's looking at this headline that says, "How is ISIS like the National Rifle Association?" And it's a very clever headline. Its moral equivalency that is so false on its face that it shouldn't be allowed in an argument. But it appeals to a liberal audience that doesn't like the National Rifle Association. Now, you know, they've opposed every campaign I've ever organized, so it's not like I'm their best friend. But it doesn't help when you suggest that somehow farmers are on welfare. To understand agriculture, it seems to be, and to get it in the political debate, you have to understand that agriculture is a basic industry to every economy. It's a basic industry. I started a restaurant when I got out of the service. We came back to Nebraska, and that's a derivative industry. Mm-hmm. Farmers put either seed or semen to work and end up with something that they can sell, and it's exceptionally hard work. And among the great problems is your factories outside, notwithstanding aero farms and other sorts of things that are trying to produce produce inside, which I find to be quite exciting. You're manufacturing your product outside. And it's a commodity. No matter what you do with, you say, "Oh, I don't like monocropping corn." I happen to like corn-fed cattle. I eat, but you don't have to eat it. You can eat something else if you want to. But we enjoy the benefits of that efficiency, in my opinion. But it's enormously risky. And I don't think you're going to connect. First of all, I don't think you're going to connect the debate about jobs until you make the case that agriculture is a basic industry. And I don't think you're going to create the kind of commonality that you need between consumers and producers until you use rhetoric that's not offensive. Because if you use offensive rhetoric in an argument, it may work for Donald Trump. His offensive rhetoric doesn't work on me. I don't know how many of you it works on, but it doesn't work when you're trying to put together, let's say, a piece of legislation.
Right.
And so I would say the 2 big things that are apt to make food increasingly relevant in political debates are jobs. And, you know, Tesla's going to have a self-driving car. I got 3 million independent truckers. Where are they going to work? Right. We're having a difficult time answering that question. Where are the jobs going to come from? And with these smaller farms, the farm-to-market operation for me is a great example of a way to reduce rural poverty, to create jobs in rural America. You can connect it.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because in your home state, the size of the farms is increasing, but the number of people who are working on those farms is decreasing.
Right. Look,
because of technology.
That's true. It's absolutely true. But you do have, we have a program on public television out there called Backyard Farmer. And there was a time when I was a boy, but that meant there was a farm. Mostly the farm wife handled the garden. And now what's happening is gardening has gone mainstream, as you know. Mm-hmm. And so people are interested in gardening. They're interested in composting. And you're seeing businesses in rural communities spring up around that demand. People interested in that. So the farm drummer, you listened to Kroger earlier, Whole Foods is the same way, Costco is the same way. They are buying local, and it's having a big impact. You don't need, it seems to me, to get some kind of rhetorical revolution in order to be able to support the change that's happening. And look, you asked me to give you equal time, and I'm probably
no. I asked you to speak
well,
volubly.
look, one of the great problems that human beings have, and we all have it, is a thing called tragedy of the commons. If I own 160 acres of land and you own 160 acres of land, my idea of a good year is you got bad weather and I've got good. And there's a tendency not to want to worry about tomorrow's generation when it comes to soil and water and other sorts of things we're using in common. But we've done a phenomenal job with soil conservation. If you're trying to do soil conservation today, you're much better off. It's 10 cents on the dollar to do it on private land.
Right.
But it's not the only area where the tragedy of the commons gets us into trouble.
Bob, this conversation about a national food policy, or this conversation about soil conservation, you will see bubbling up on the coasts in conferences like this one, but acted upon in farm states. And I'm interested in how you see, is there a possible bridge between these two? Look, yes, it begins with respectful language.
I think there is, but I think it's also, look, my mom grew up on a farm. I worked on that farm in Iowa when I was a kid. And when I was making a decision what I was going to do with my life, farming was not on the list. It's too bloody hard, I said. I got to find something easier.
So you became
I have
a
no
SEAL.
room.
He became a Navy SEAL rather than be a farmer.
Not really. I joined the Navy to avoid the Army, and there was other serendipitous moment that ended up in me in that food group. So, no, I think you have to acknowledge the work that's required in the basic industry and how it creates jobs and the impact it has on the economy. It doesn't mean that we can't advocate change. And Bob Dole and I are the special advisors of the Humane Society at the moment, and I'll show you my inbox from people who think that I'm trying to put them out of business. But I think we had last year, and we had a terrific guy from Georgia who I think had a very, very good definition of what humane treatment of animals is. And I think most of the producers are getting that. Most of the producers are changing. Most of the innovation, I completely reject. I'm 73. I reject the idea that at 75 you stop innovating.
Right.
That's the tunnel vision of somebody who's 35. It is not, in fact, what you see on the farms themselves. And to be profitable today, 4,000. You go out there and grow 4,000 acres of corn, let's say this year. That's a big farm. Let's say they produce 200 bushels an acre. That's $800,000. At today's prices, that's $1.6 million. An average Chipotle that's selling E. coli along with it makes more than that. These are relatively small, relatively difficult. I promise you they're not making any money this year. I promise you they're going to make under considerable risk. So I think jobs is enormously important. I think one of the big tragedy of the commons, by the way, is we're allocating less and less basic and applied research for how to do it better, how to develop alternatives. In part because...
Well, is that research, Bob, going to come out of the private sector or out of the government?
It needs to come more and more out. Dollar for dollar, public research is more valuable than private research. And the problem is, right now, talk about tragedy of the commons, we're shoveling more and more money to people over the age of 65 and less money to people under the age of 30. The average cost per worker today for Social Security and Medicare and long-term care Medicaid is almost $20,000 a year. And because they don't vote, they get screwed. And more of our money is going into transfer payments and less of it going to basic and applied research at state level and at the federal level. And it's a huge problem.
So then how do voters affect a change at the state and federal level?
I think they have to talk about the jobs that agriculture creates. I think they have to talk about lots of things we've heard already about the way to create jobs with small-scale agriculture, with farm-to-market efforts. I think one of the great things the USDA did recently, I wish they'd have done nationwide. They started this pilot to put the SNAP program online. 300,000 people signed a signature, and they it's going to create fraud. It's not going to create fraud. They can take fraud down.
Seems to work for Amazon.
It is, but it's going to open up opportunities for people to be able to help low-income people eat better. And the second big area, by the way, and it's huge, is health. I mean, when are the doctors of America going to say that this is a serious problem? I'm doing actually a pilot program with the Veterans Administration in Omaha, Nebraska. Here are the numbers in Nebraska. And by the way, if you're from some other state besides Nebraska, your state's the same way. In 1990, 10% of adult Nebraskans were obese by medical definition. By We worked real hard. By 2000, we got it up to 20%. Last year, it was 33%. We spend $313 billion with a B dollars on type 2 diabetes. The American Diabetes says type 2 can't be put in remission. That is inaccurate. There's plenty of research to show that under medical supervision, that you can cut your carbohydrates back, you can go into ketosis, and you can get off your meds. But they're funded by companies that are selling insulin. So it's not going to be in their interest. University of Nebraska Medical Center has a big bariatric surgery operation, charging $25,000 per surgery. Guess what they say on the website? It's the only cure for type 2 diabetes. I mean, if Donald Trump is lying about the birther movement, the University of Nebraska Medical Center is lying about type 2 diabetes. And it's a huge problem. And what you end up finding yourself in is defending, well, if you have a low-carb diet, prove to me that it's going to work. Prove to me that what we're doing now is working. All we're doing is seeing an increase in the number of people with type 2, hypertension, and cancers that are related to basically to obesity. It doesn't mean obesity causes these things, but boy, are they correlated.
So if I were to narrow that down, I would say that the status quo applies, and that when the status quo applies, we are not going to see a change on a federal level, much less on a state level, in how we address food policy in the United States.
First of all, I'll bet you, let's say you got 1,000, you bring 1,000 farmers into this room at random. None of them are going to buy in the idea that if they just do what they've done last year over and over and over, they're going to be successful. There's nobody that succeeds today, other than somebody who's in a very protected market, like let's say a university or college. It's very, very difficult to do the same thing today and survive. Everybody knows there's disruption across the board. Disruption in growing, disruption in transportation, disruption that's going on. The way people are eating. We are eating differently. We aren't eating differently fast enough. I was on a commission just to make my healthcare thing. A third of high school graduates today are too obese to join the military. You know, you no longer have to do indecent exposure to get out of the draft. You just have to eat as you're told to do when you're in the school lunch program. So it is a major problem, and I do think you're going to get breakthroughs. I think anybody that's in the healthcare business understands they can't continue making all the money they're making on treating people with metabolic diseases, most of which are preventable.
So those breakthroughs then you would posit will come about as technological breakthroughs that will allow us to move forward, or market ones?
I think it's going to be a combination of many things. I think on the food side, consumers are going to drive it. They're driving it. They're eating differently.
Well, that's been suggested on this stage already today.
It's going to accelerate. And by the way, if you're producing food, please don't tell me the consumers don't have anything to say in this thing. I mean, I want to see the consumers and the producers have a little better conversation. But if I'm producing food, my consumers got a lot to say about it. In fact, when I was in business, I always felt like the consumer's right, even if they're jerks. They decide what they want to eat something differently than what I'm serving them. They get to eat something differently than what I'm serving them. So I think the consumer changes are very, very exciting, particularly in the millennial generation. And I think you can see that change in Kroger. You can see it in Whole Foods. You can see it in Costco. You can see it in restaurants. You can see it even in the school lunch program. People are eating differently. It's not happening nearly as fast as I would like, because I do think we've got a crisis when it comes to obesity.
Well, then what is the role of government in that? We keep eliding that. Can government lead in this?
Oh man, that's.
I mean, let's imagine choose a Clinton
I was about to
Trump
answer your question when you changed it to can government lead in this? Look, I have enough time in politics. This is what I know, and I think we all have this in common. One of the great answers that Secretary Clinton gave last night was about bias. We all have biases. It's hard to say that one group of people has a bias and the other people don't. So. If I said to you that there's 1,000 people in the room, just imagine I'm speaking to you, each one of you individually. There's 1,000 people over here, and you're going to go give a speech. And I'll give you the speech. I'll give you 2 speeches. They're short. One speech, you're going to get a standing ovation, but the speech is factually inaccurate. But that audience is going to give you a standing ovation, and they're going to celebrate what you said. They're all going to come up afterwards, thank you very much, it was a beautiful speech. The other speech, somewhere between silence and boos, right? Factually accurate. If you have to decide, which do I prefer? you know, it's sort of like you had a great researcher here, I think last year, the year before last, talking about taste and how bitterness is in the plants, and it's an evolutionary response to keep us from getting poisoning. Well, I think we prefer to get a round of applause to being booed. And that's the problem. The problem is, I can write an applause line right now that sounds like the Jabberwocky, would get you all to your feet. It's basically a cadence thing. And you know, I would say, if you give a politician a standing ovation, you probably shouldn't have, and you're probably endorsing something you shouldn't be endorsing. And too often it's the audience that encourages these windbags to go on and on saying things that aren't true. So, yes, I think government can lead. Absolutely.
Maybe we don't want that.
The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid. You know, earlier there's a reference to farmers being on welfare. Anybody on Medicare in here? Anybody a Medicare doctor? We spent $800 billion subsidizing the purchase of health care for Medicare and Medicaid. Right? That's direct spending. And the answer is, if you're spending $800 billion, you can have a big impact. And they're starting to. They're starting to move to value-based healthcare. They're starting to move to results. They're starting to measure what's the outcome of what you're doing, not as have you reduced the pain and suffering long enough to get them out of the hospital. So I think the answer is yes, you can. But boy, changing my behavior, if you say to me, Bob, you're fat and you need to change, that's hard enough. But if I've got a financial interest in keeping the status quo alive, it gets hard. It gets hard. Now, you know, it's the old, when a man tells you it's not the money, it's the principle, it's the money.
Yeah. Now, Bob, I'm a little worried about that applause for you, so I want to get some tough questions going. We will take a few here. We got a mic in the back. We'll go here, and then we'll move around.
I am a hand-weeded, hand-harvested vegetable grower from the Pacific Northwest. And we can't survive, even though I sign my name on the dotted line and carry the liability every year, without hands in the dirt and boots on the ground working our fields. Immigration reform doesn't look like there's going to be a solution anytime soon. I'm wondering how you feel about a guest worker program that actually works.
Oh, I would support it. I mean, look, I think one of the mistakes we made when we were negotiating the North American Free Trade Agreement, which all the facts show it's worked. It hadn't done that much. It hasn't been horrible, but there's no bureaucracy. There's no administrative overhead. We probably should have created a North American identification card that would let people move at will. They want it, if there's a job in Guadalajara, well, why shouldn't I be able to go to Guadalajara? If there's a job in Duluth, Minnesota, why shouldn't I be able, or the Pacific Northwest? I think and this is a relatively recent phenomenon, by the way. When I hear friends of mine my age say, well, my grandfather came here and he had to learn to speak English. And okay, would you like to go back to the immigration laws your grandfather faced? We didn't have very strict on immigration until 1924. And then we ID'd the Italians. We ID'd the Japanese. We ID'd anybody. I mean, if you look at the people who are identified in the 1924 Immigration Act, that's the first time visas were required after the First World War. And if you get in a conversation about when did this country make its greatest progress, it was probably 1880 to 1920, during that terrible time of immigration. So
we're going to get into
that
question.
Yes, I think I would go further than even a guest worker program.
I told you, he told you about the applause, yes. And you're still applauding.
That wasn't a standing ovation.
It was close. I cut it off. Sir.
Thank you. I wanted to talk a little bit about consumer trends that you mentioned as kind of leading change in the food systems. But if consumers lead trends, whether for health or other reasons, are agriculture subsidies kind of the golden handcuffs that stop farmers actually from taking risk and changing crops to what consumers actually want?
No, I don't think so. First of all we have right now is crop insurance. So it's a subsidy for the risks that you associate with producing stuff outside. But you see a substantial amount of innovation. I mean, if I'm growing non-GMO or organic, I never want label. I would say, Monsanto, never change your position. Because I get a 25% premium right now on doing something that I can put on the label. And they're moving. They're moving to organic. They're moving to the different kinds of. I think they are trying to hit what the consumer wants. But we still have substantial desire for all the processed things that necessitate me growing 4,000 acres of corn. As that changes, particularly as you see the farm-to-market operation grow. As you see the farm-to-market operation grow, I think I'll repeat it, I think the farm-to-market operation properly supported, and I do think a piece of that's going to come from increased public support for R&D. As that grows, that'll do more to reduce rural poverty than anything that I can think of, because it creates real jobs. I mean, I love that Kroger is doing it, but if you go to a rural community in Nebraska, what you oftentimes see is the number one employer is a hospital, and they're being subsidized. They're being paid 110% of Medicare rates to keep those rural hospitals alive. So these value-added agriculture industries, because they're basic, create an awful lot of jobs and generate an awful lot of wealth, and need to be seen not as an either-or, but typically an and, typically added.
You can go to upstate New York and see our prisons. That's where we employ our folks. Someone in the back, please.
Hi, you touched on an issue that's near and dear to my heart, which is agricultural R&D spend. Last week, I was reading the journal article Nature, in which they analyzed 50 years of global ag R&D spend, and in 2011 found that for the first time, 52% of our global ag R&D spend comes from private corporations. So this is a significant shift in how we've been funding as a society ag R&D, and I was just curious, can you comment on that? Should we as a society be very concerned about the shift in spending? And secondly, representing a university and a land grant, how does the university and land grant structure navigate the interests of our political stakeholders for more public and private sector partnerships with our desire to independently test and be transparent?
The answer is yes, but there's no free lunch. That's the problem. I mean, the problem with, let's say, state support of the land grant or other public universities, the problem there is the growing cost of Medicaid. It's almost a dollar for dollar reduction. Every time Medicaid goes up, the cutbacks occur to primarily post-secondary education. So all in favor of cutting the Medicaid program back. Ooh, geez, I don't want to do that. And at the federal level, we had a 1 point increase in GDP spending for Social Security over the last 8 years. That's $150 billion. All in favor of just curtailing the growth a little more so that we can pay. The answer is no, because 90% of us over the age of 65 vote. So we're going to get pandered to. You're just getting back what you paid in, which is nonsense. But I'm going to believe it if it's in my interest. So I think the woman who's the governor of Rhode Island, she ran in a Democratic primary with a Democratic labor state. She said, you cannot be a liberal unless you go after these pensions, because it's taking more and more of our money, and we have less and less for these basic investments that we all support. And I happen to agree with her. She won a Democratic primary. I think it takes that kind of effort. There's no free lunch here. I think if you want to see increases in public research, and I do, there's only one place to get it, and that's from federal entitlements. And we're converting our federal government to an ATM machine. It's all going to be transfers. But you listen to the presidential debate, Hillary wants to expand it, and so does Donald Trump. I rest my case.
We're going to go over to this side of the room.
I've greatly enjoyed what you had to say. I can't disagree with you more. And I'm curious to know why you would pick on Medicare and Medicaid without mentioning the wars. It's not in the topic of food conversation, but...
Madam, I don't have an army in Nebraska. I have no defense budget in Nebraska. And if you give me, I'll give you my...
But we're spending.
I'll give you my email address. You give me yours, and I'll show you what's happened over the last 30 years with state support of higher education. Dollar for dollar displacement for Medicaid. It's not because we're spending money on a war in Nebraska. And every state's the same way. And I'll show you the federal budget. And by the way, the federal budget, it's going to begin to make you happy by displacing the DOD as well and reducing our capacity to fight wars. The growth in these programs, I'm not attacking Medicare. I support Medicare. It's a great program. Social Security is a great program. But I just look at the trends. We had an $80 billion increase last year in Medicare and Social Security, and no debate. And I just think there's a limit, and I think we're heading to that limit.
Okay, we can take one last question before we go to break. Right over here. We'll keep it on this side of the aisle.
There are a lot of really exciting models being developed at the local level to prove that feeding people healthy food is a huge cost savings in terms of treating disease. How can we find a way to aggregate some of these really good metric models that are being developed to hopefully create a system in which that's rewarded?
It's a good question. I mean, first of all, I think it's being done, not as fast as I would like, but I think it is being done. I think I'd find common cause with producers. I'd make it a jobs issue. I'd be militant on the health issue. I think if you look at this, we respond with great care about Zika. That's a much lower risk to our health than what we're eating and the way we're eating. So I think when it comes to the health issue, what you've got is a force field of current standard of care. And you have to confront it, but it's happening. I mean, the good news for me is you do see at the margin. I mentioned the USDA SNAP program online. I think it's a phenomenal story. I wish it had gone nationwide immediately. I think it's a phenomenal story, and I think we're apt to hear more and more of it. I'm personally optimistic that over the next 0 to 10 years, we're going to start to see obesity go down and type 2 diabetes go down, because I think people are typically happier when they're healthier.
Okay, folks, it's okay. You can applaud Senator Bob Kerrey. Thank you.